The key thing for a chief executive, no matter what organization, is to project a vision. Get there. In the political arena, the chief executive's job is to look over the horizon. And the chief executive is the only person doing that because the legislative branch is reactive. They tend to have 2-year horizons. What do I need to get reelected? And that's healthy because it means there's checks and balances. But the chief executive has got to be bold within reason and daring in application. If one sees a problem looming, it's essential for the chief executive to figure out how to deal with that, as opposed to shirking that duty. Oftentimes in politics, and maybe sometimes in the corporate world, if there's a looming problem, some people say, we'll leave it to the next person. And to me, that's a sign of a failed leader. Leaders prioritize what's important. Leaders set an agenda. Agendas don't get set by consensus oftentimes. If you're leading a corporation or leading an entity, it's up to you as the leader. Now, obviously, you got to consult with advisors, board of directors, key personnel whose judgment you trust. But ultimately, a leader leads. It's difficult in politics sometimes because there's a lot of competing pressures. Occasionally the editorials in my case weren't all that positive. And therefore, people say, well, no, the editorial this, the editorial that. I didn't give a damn about the editorials because I cared about the big picture, what I was trying to achieve. And that's the beauty of democracy, because during campaigns, you articulate the big picture and you articulate the priorities you intend to set. And it's important to follow through on those. In order to be effective, you got to delegate. And delegating to me was very natural. For example, in the Rangers, my partners and I would set the budget, but we would delegate the player selection to the general manager and his scouts, people who knew what they were talking about. And I don't think we ever walked in and said, go sign, Babe Ruth. He'll make our team a lot better. We delegated properly. We obviously paid attention to it, but we trusted the people we had hired. The interesting thing about the presidency is there's a lot of issues that take place at the same time. And it's important to think about that and not get mired in details where you can't think big picture. The danger with many CEOs is micromanagement. I'm going to decide the gym privileges that are now available for our team. But as a leader, dealing with that kind of minutia takes one's mind off of the big picture. And one of the real challenges in leading an organization is to keep the big picture in mind. How do you set clear goals? How do you have a clear mission statement? Managers need to spend a lot of time on trying to figure out how to clearly state the objectives of, say, their company or their nonprofit. And so when I read mission statements, and they tend to be vague and kind of full of flowery words and unachievable goals and reassuring statements, my view is that that's not going to be an effective mission statement. A mission statement must say, here's our goals and here we're going to achieve them. And so a fuzzy mission statement probably means fuzzy goals. Mission statements must be focused on that which is important and transformative, and make it clear so that the people that work in those organizations know where they're headed and know what's expected. I think it's always important to set a tone of let's work together, particularly in a democracy. Just like it is always important for somebody running an organization to set the tone, I want to listen to your thoughts. And therefore, one of the key aspects of building a culture of teamwork is to make sure that the power is accessible, that people have a chance to come and knock on your door and share thoughts. Or more importantly, you go knock on their door to listen to what they have to say. Obviously, a CEO can't spend all his or her time running up and down hallways soliciting opinion. But there are key moments when one can do that, and it sends the right signals. So one of the unusual things about my administration was a lot of people from Texas came up. We'd gotten to know each other. We were a team. We were comfortable with each other. I was comfortable with them. But I asked my friend Andy Card to become the chief of staff. I didn't pick a Texan to be chief of staff. I picked somebody who knew something about Washington. After all, he had been deputy chief of staff, and he had been cabinet secretary. Plus, I knew that his ego was such that he wouldn't mind if people came in to see me without his presence. I told Andy, I said, Andy, one of the key things to keeping a team healthy and a culture vibrant is that people have got to be able to come and see the president, particularly the people I've known for so long, that we cannot deny them access. And he said, I'm more than happy to do that, but never make a decision without telling me. And so I think people would tell you that there was a chance, they had a chance to come in if they had something to say. A team can be disrupted if people don't think they've got opportunity to visit with the team leader and to share thoughts. So access to power is incredibly important in Washington or anywhere else for that matter in terms of building a team that can work together. Organizations are stabilized when the leader is willing to share credit and take blame. I think all those ingredients are necessary to developing a culture that works and a culture that can withstand pressures. I think people would tell you that I shared credit. And when things failed, I took blame. You know, I think of Katrina. I took a trip down to the Katrina area as quickly as I could, and I landed in Mississippi, and the Alabama governor was there along with the Mississippi governor. And he said, Brownie here's done a good job. He was the head of FEMA. And I turned to Brownie and said, heck of a job, Brownie. Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. The FEMA director's working 24 hours. By the time we got to New Orleans, my attempts to raise the spirits of somebody who's working hard became a political liability. People use that as a phrase to show I was out of touch, when in fact, I thought I was exhibiting a good leadership trait, which is to share credit and thank people for a job well done. And so my attempt to share credit backfired a little bit on me, but it's that's my nature to have done that. I think it's a nature that managers must have. I think, you know, you got to recognize that you're not doing things alone, and that when there's success, you share credit with your team and make it abundantly clear you mean it. In order to achieve results, you got to have clear goals. And then you got to have an organization that encourages and incents people to meet those goals, which means you can't assign somebody a task of helping to meet a goal without giving them the authority. In other words, you're responsible for achieving this, but if that person doesn't have the authority to do so, nobody gets held to account, which is one of the real frustrations of government bureaucracy. It's hard to hold people to it. There's a lot of moving pieces, and people are pretty effective at dodging responsibility. I had people with me in Washington who began to worry about how the White House organization was drifting. In other words, lines of authority and responsibility were becoming obscured. And one day my friend Clay Johnson came in and said, can you draw me a chart of how the White House is organized? And I scribbled along, and all of a sudden it looked like a bowl of spaghetti. It wasn't clear. And he said, you got to do something about this. And so it was the beginning of a change on how the White House was structured, personnel and structural-wise. If you really think through the alignment of authority and responsibility, there's only one logical conclusion, that you can't hold anybody to account unless they have the authority to accomplish that which they're responsible for. A school principal is a classic example. The school principal is responsible for the maintenance of a school and how it functions, but has no authority to hire and fire a teacher in certain instances. Or the school principal has no authority to set a budget, yet is held responsible for how that school functions. And there's a classic case of disassociating the two, which means that if you call the principal and say, well, you should have done this or that, the person said, I would have, but you didn't give me the authority. And so no one gets held account, which means results are diminished. So a classic case came with PEPFAR, which was the President's AIDS Initiative program. And we got a business guy to run it, Randy Tobias. And we set clear goals. Pretty easy to do in PEPFAR, which was how do we get antiretrovirals to people with AIDS in certain countries? And how do we get information about how to prevent AIDS in the first place in certain countries? But we had to make sure we aligned authority and responsibility, because in order for there to be results, the host nations had to buy into the program. They had to be willing to implement alongside of us. They became a stakeholder in the country's response to AIDS. And that way we could hold people to account and we gave them responsibility to, for example, develop the antiretrovirals. We gave them responsibility to distribute the antiretrovirals. And the program was widely successful because of the management principles employed in PEPFAR.